Hi, I'm Dazza Greenwood, and I'm really into generative AI. My area is law, practiced law in the 90s, tech law, and now I'm back in technology. And I run a research group at MIT called law.mit.edu, where we do computational law, prototypes, and convening. And I live in Oakland for the last few years, and now I'm happy to be affiliated with Stanford Law School as well, something called Codex, which is the computational law kind of counterpart here in the Bay Area. And I'm really into agents, and this is the reactions I usually get when I talk about AI agents. And I think somebody in the couple of panels ago said, yeah, we should connect climate change and AI because they're both things that are going to kill us. So that's the person on the left. And there's also like, hey, agents, those things, when we configure them right and align them, could really help us. That would be the person over here. And I've actually been into this for a long time. I think agents are all the rage right now. Oh, hold on. I need to put a timer on her. We'll be finishing about 4 p.m. Okay. In the late 90s, I was working a lot on uniform law. You guys probably heard of the Uniform Commercial Code. That's the main commercial law in the United States at the state level. When e-commerce was getting to be a big thing in the late 90s, we realized we needed some legal updates and reforms to make sure we could have electronic records, electronic contracts. That was called Uniform Electronic Transactions Act. I was deeply involved in drafting that. And this memo here shows some of the work that I had done, making sure we had electronic agents provisions in that law. And we do. I'll get into those in a moment when we talk about the legal infrastructure supporting electronic agents and LLM agents now. But the main thing is that these provisions were uncannily prescient, I think, in terms of how autonomous systems are playing out today. And over the years, I've done a lot of stuff with autonomous organizations and different methods of wrapping agents. The main thing that's different now than what we really had at hand even just a few years ago. Yes, the question was, could I define what I mean by agent? And that brings us exactly to this slide and the next one. So perfect timing. In the old world, you could say, as in, a few years ago and before, we certainly had agents, but they were more, let's call it deterministic systems that could do a bunch of things, automated workflows. But what's different now, in particular with the new class of transformer model-based generative AI, is you actually can get a kind of almost like reasoning or a kind of thinking. It's not the same way humans do it, but based on kind of benchmarks and evals and just lived experience using these systems, they can look at novel things that no one had ever seen before and come up with potentially reasonable inferences about that. And when you start to you can compose questions and prompts and other systems like the ability to use APIs and to store memory over sessions and access other data with a lot of application logic. You can actually sort of compose these capabilities to be kind of like an agent that can think. This is really interesting, especially in a legal context when you can see, well, first of all, practically, doing automated contracting systems, every single transaction code and everything else had to line up perfectly. It was like an engineered deterministic system for supply chains, payment networks, everything like that, even for smart contracts in the blockchain context now. But most contracts are a little bit more ambiguous, they're a little bit more fuzzy. And it doesn't take necessarily genius level of federal judge skills to figure out what the contract means. It is actually well within the capabilities of especially the most current LLMs. Claude 3.7, GPT 4.5, Gemini 2.0 Pro, et cetera. And some of the open source models as well. So what's different is they can kind of like, quote, think for themselves, and they can adapt. So this one hopefully will scratch the itch of the question. I think some of the capabilities that distinguish these things are You can start with a goal. You kind of give it a goal that it's doing, like conduct a transaction, brainstorm something, take a look at this environmental remediation plan and identify if it's in alignment with these 10 priorities or not, et cetera. It can deal with a lot of environmental complexity, like inputs that weren't pre-programmed and that might be changing. It can adapt, and it can start to even execute on things. So in a chat interface, the execution is that it gives you an output that's like language or an image. But as you start to encapsulate these things in applications, the output can absolutely be much more sophisticated. Here's something from just last year that I really like from a research perspective from Sakana Labs in Japan. They put together a bunch of agents in these different lanes to generate ideas. And they can generate ideas when you prompt them right and give them access to like archive.org and other systems that generate ideas for research, create synthetic data sets, create some, do some software engineering, some Python and some other stuff, NumPy, SciPy, run experiments based on hypotheses it generated, get results. Another set of agents look at those results. Is there anything interesting here? No, 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 yes, yes, no, maybe. Can start to rate and rank those things, which they do. And then it can take the one that's really good. And then another set of agents were like, okay, let's look at the results. Let's look at our hypothesis. Here's templates for research papers of this type. Let's write a draft of a paper. Let's iterate the paper, do stuff like deep research, which we have now from OpenAI and others, and actually publish a paper, not peer-reviewed, not even human-reviewed. And so this isn't necessarily something that we're going to want to do right now, but as a proof of concept for how sophisticated these things can be, I think it was very good. And the code is available to download and to run yourself on GitHub. It's costly. There's a lot of API calls, but this to me was astonishing. And this is like almost a year ago now. Within the last few days, we're seeing much more sophisticated. Over the year, we've seen a steady pump of incremental and sometimes bigger increases in what types of AI agents we have. Over the last few days, we had Manus out of China, a general purpose agent. The first one I showed you is domain specific. All the prompts and everything is connected to doing research and generating a research thing and writing a paper. This one's Manus is general purpose, so you can throw any goal or idea at it, and it will reason about what it is and start to produce results for that idea, including generating code or coming up with a business plan or just whatever it is. On the right side, just a few days ago, OpenAI finally dropped their agents, the OpenAI AI agent SDK. I was really fortunate to have early access to that, and it is phenomenal. At the bottom, there's a link to or a screenshot from something at dazagreenwood.com, which you can click on if you're interested to learn more. But that's basically demo night of some of the stuff you can do with this new agent API. I did something like Manus, but it only took me like not very long to do that. So when you start to create better tooling and better developer experiences for these agents, they're huge. Now, you can use these things for democracy. You can use these things for collaboration, a lot of good stuff. The thing that I'm particularly interested in is a little off to the side, but it is not without public and civic interest and need. And that's transactions. It's a kind of lie practice. It's kind of what I'm into, kind of purchase and sale, e-commerce. And that is part of almost everything that we do. Even if you're running an environmental nonprofit, at some point you want to cut a deal, you want to source stuff, you want to have an arrangement with another consortium. These interactions and transactions and legal stuff is part of it. And it's kind of a hardcore use case. Some of the basic normal ones from UCC are like, shopping, travel booking, and these are very well supported in the current transactional agent frameworks and services. Some mass market ones that are now available as of a few months ago are Perplexity, which has something called Buy with Perplexity. So when you do your search, your AI search with Perplexity, and you're looking for products or services or what have you, as a pro user, it'll give you a set of answers, and you could click on it and it'll give you prices. You can select a product you want. and basically it'll purchase it for you and send it to your ship to address. Pretty interesting. I've used it, and it was pretty good. Stripe is even more mainstream than Perplexity, and so 3 months ago they dropped the Stripe Agent API, and so they now have built out this entire part of the Stripe API. Stripe it facilitates a huge amount of commercial payment transactions right now, and they made it possible to basically scope authorization, spending limits, and other dimensions of delegated authorization, and basically allocate those API rights and authorizations to agents. Okay, Stripe is big, so like this is not a futuristic talk anymore the way it's been most of my life. Like this is happening now. But I don't think we're completely ready for this. Going back to the lady on the right, going on the roller coaster, like I do have some trepidations about this, and I feel like there's some gaps that need to be filled. And commons are a very good way to do some of this. They will be filled one way or another. They'll be filled by companies that are optimizing for their interests, but we can get ahead of this a little bit. So one of the things that needs to happen is authenticated delegation for authorized AI agents operating on behalf of a person or your organization. This is not impossible, but there's some dots to be connected to do that. And so there's a great paper, if I may say so, as a co-author, but I didn't come up with this idea. I kind of came along later for authenticated delegation that uses OpenID Connect and OAuth 2, and basically configures these existing widely used standards so that some of the auth tokens and so forth are allocated to agents, and the user maintains control the whole way through, and the external parties can verify and rely on that. There's also a whole bunch of existing laws I mentioned earlier that we can look at and kind of reframe for these new issues. Uniform Electronic Transactions Act is the biggest unknown law out there that I want to make sure everyone has at least heard of. And so this is enacted in 49 states of the United States for like 20 plus years. It's part of the legal fabric and all the territories of the United States. It's part of the legal fabric of the United States. And it has provisions for autonomous agents, okay? It was a little ahead of its time. And I remember I showed you that memo, like we were advocating that we make it future-proof to include deterministic agents and autonomous agents. We did that. I assumed it would have happened, 20 years ago. It was always around the corner. Well, it's happening now. It's happened now. And they basically come up with some specific, well, first of all, they define it as a computer program that's used independently to initiate basically a transaction, and it can finish the transaction without review or action by the individual. Okay, so that's like the essence of autonomy. No human review or approval, and it conducts and finalizes a transaction. It's like legally enforceable. Okay. It does automated transactions, so we have some other provisions that enable and define when you have agents on both sides of the transaction, which is legit, it's good, it's inevitable. And really interestingly, we also put some provisions in there for what we foresaw, especially with these generative non-deterministic systems, that there'll be errors introduced. When you can't know exactly what an LLM is going to come up with in advance, it could come up with things that may stray from your intention and may not be aligned with exactly what it is that your interests are. I think there's a lot of ways to deal with that, including having the providers have a fiduciary duty to the user, and we can get into that more later. But technically, in the law right now, if an agent system does not provide the ability, if there's an error that results from the agent doing stuff that got out of alignment with the user, the user can reverse the transaction under this provision, Section 10B of UITA, if the agent system did not provide a means to prevent or correct the error. It's very fair. And this was standard back in the late 90s when we wrote this. In 2025, this would have been hard to get through because industry would have been, oh my God, you can't reverse the transaction. But hey, suck it up. It's the law, and this is the law of the land. This is really handy. We can use this. law. You can read more about that, including ways to support and reflect it within systems that use transactional agents at dazagreenwood.com. Kind of break it all down. We also have an open source reference implementation for how to do error detection and to provide error prevention or error correction, which is sometimes needed because you don't know what it's going to do in advance, so that so it's fair, so the user can basically hit the red button on a transaction before they're on the hook for it. And also the merchant or whoever's on the other side doesn't have to worry about this lingering uncertainty about, will the user later say it wasn't what I intended, and under UITA I can reverse the transaction? No, just build it so that you gave them an opportunity to prevent or correct. And so that's what this open source does, just to show people how to do that. It's actually not that hard when you think about it, but you do have to think about it. And first you will have to have heard of it. Therefore, I'm telling you. What does this have to do with the commons? Everything. So like I do a lot of consulting work for companies. And the way this is going, as I was mentioning, is going to be effective and productive and efficient, but it may not exactly support and reflect the best interests of individuals and consumers and so forth. And so I've been putting a lot of time into working with state legislatures to develop updated legal frameworks that fill gaps that UITA had. A statute I'm really proud of is in Wyoming. It's the personal digital identity statute. And it creates definitions for these new kinds of agents. More recently, within the last year, I've been helping Wyoming with legislative hearings on LLM agents. And most importantly, right now, I think the best thing to do is to get together as people and to come up with best practices, model statutes, and maybe most practically model contract provisions and configurations for systems that use AI agents that can create fair and beneficial results. This is great technology. I'm definitely more like the lady on the left when it comes to this. I love this stuff. It's just the tech I've always wanted, especially for legal stuff and transactions. You just have to do it in a good way, and a good way to do it in a good way is through a public commons. So therefore, I'm convening with Consumer Reports and with HAI and Stanford Codex at Stanford, a new work stream where we come up with legal frameworks, or mostly adapt and apply legal frameworks. They support and reflect the imminent, emerging, and going to be humongous by the end of this year use of AI agents. So we'll get out ahead of it. We'll sort of have some reference implementation, some simple protocols that basically just apply existing protocols that people already use, and some ways to structure your contract so everything is hunky-dory. I wish I could get into more detail. Well, the most important thing is, if you're interested in this, or you think you know someone who might be, your lawyer people, your entrepreneurs, your visionaries, send them to computationallaw.org. And there they will see some really awesome stuff where they can basically find out about the first big open workshop that we're doing on April 8th as part of Future Law Week at Stanford. And all they have to do, this is outdated. Anyway, in the new version, they will have a way that they can sign up oops, I'm going to stop clicking buttons. So they can sign up and request request an invitation to this workshop. And even if you can't make the workshop, although it's in person and virtual, they should, if they're interested in this stuff, just put the form in and say, I was at Funding the Commons, or someone at Funding the Commons told me about this, and I want to get involved. Like, put me on your email list, like, let's set up a call. So I'm in active community building mode right now. And with a little bit of resource, we can go a long way. So I hope that you're interested in AI agents and would like to build the future that we would prefer to inhabit by coming together in a commons way now. Thanks. Do we have time for a question, or am I just so awful? Oh, good. I'm not that awful in terms of time. Anyone have questions or ideas? Yes, sir. Yeah. So the question was, what's the scope of application for this stuff? I'm super coming, like you had me at Web 2, so I'm like kind of like very much there still. But when I think about a Solidity contract or anything that's a smart contract, which is good and it's important. I hope that continues to develop. The way I would apply this, and actually there's like a branch in the GitHub repo for the open source reference implementation that you'll see that does this, is I would lean on error prevention because there ain't much you can do with error correction. You can sort of do out of channel stuff, but it's a lot. It all sounds scary and terrifying to me. It's lady on the right stuff. So I think lady on the left stuff is error prevention. And it's super doable. Actually, the stuff isn't that hard. We just have to think it through and do it. Anybody else? Yes, sir. Oh, New York, those bastards, because they're the Empire State. What's the 50th state that didn't enact UETA? And so, but they have something comparable. So yeah. Is UETA vulnerable? I don't think it is. It's been litigated a little bit, but it's just very common sense, basic law, and nobody's ever talked about reforming or deleting it. There was a federal law that almost preempted it called e-sign, Electronic Signatures and Global National Commerce Act, but I was able to work with McCain, who was then head of the Senate Commerce Committee, and Bliley and others, and we have a carve out for UETA, so it's not preempted. So like this is like it's a load-bearing beam of the law, so rely on it, go forth and prosper. Okay, thanks.